Hi, a very good evening, one and all. Today I'll be showing you my digital storytelling project entitled The Interview. And today's plan is to play through the game, explain how it works, explain the logic of it, explain the code of it, and yeah, we'll go from there. Okay, I'm just gonna share screen now and we're gonna play the game together, share sound. Okay, just gonna do it the whole desktop. That makes more sense. Okay, let's play. So you can see we've got code here, got a soundtrack, and let's begin. Hey, Mr. James Runner, thank you for accepting your assignment with the USA Department of Education. The governing authority of institutions of higher learning and must be their ethical education policy. Actions are emerging on that sounds cool. Your mission. You want you know about this autonomous no, I'm not for that. Yes, Pegasus says going. Click the interviewer. Lovely. Credibility. Is it worrying the legacy engines rise? I get about that. That software can be bought for 50. It's terrible. That it's the best university. People are going to be behind because yeah, if everyone thinks it. Worse into the part, yes. I see where it's going, but Singapore, and I don't like how executing. Let's stop there. Okay, so they need me to be consistent with policy. Yes, that's bad. We should be putting on the values. We're going to be from effort rather than from perfect. Of course. Move that person because of the end. Yeah, of course. Person by control proportion instead of allowing. It's terrible. Yeah. We remove quotas for students. I see. Oh. What? Alright, it's over. That's definitely gonna help the student. Sports and arts, yeah, of course. Not that I'm that sporty, but I think it's cool. It's a cool to passion for sports and arts. Was nice. what we just said, you know? Okay, I've got some heart. Awesome. But you also got me interesting. Oh, whoa. Hello, tiger. There's a talker asking me about socioeconomic divides. I mean, what am I supposed to say? Actually, I'm worried that this tiger has a good vocabulary. Homogeneous groups need similar mindsets. Yes, I think my very careful at that. Say that. Okay, like there's speech potential. Patterns and nonsense. Yeah, we try to get about keeping. We try to get about keeping treating not out. At first. Huh? Oh, know about that. Like, just awesome. I remember. Ability went to disaster. What's gonna happen? Are you serious? I'm gonna get eaten by the tiger to play. That's crazy. Okay. Second round, and we're gonna be careful. So thinking about it, I think this game calls us out for not thinking about stuff. I didn't even realize that, so we're gonna have to be more careful. I think this round I'm certain, but I think we guess so. No, I want to be safe right here. This right here. Put it on. Wait, I should. Yes. With my moral intuitions. Yes, they should, but I don't think. I mean, it should, but I don't like how questions go. Okay. Yeah, so they don't like my answers to this. Android doesn't like my answer, but I think we have a really good to here, I wonder. Let's see. Concern. All right. That's nice. Nationwide stream. if I say false to joining us, and I supposedly like oppose it, then I want to. Yeah, so that's incredibly interesting. I'm gonna try to be clear. So, well, you realize that was contradicting just now. But anyway, any questions with this directly is about Coda? No. Oh yeah. So I am concerned about it, but I'm gonna have to make sure some of my answers to this allow me to say no. Because I want to but I don't like diversity is essential. That's what okay. Shouldn't we judge them fairly? Well, yes. But what's it is? Ultimately, what's fair is fair, right? And we don't know what different yardsticks are doing. Okay. Hard work to ultimate, but I don't even know anymore. Yeah. Why couldn't say okay, now I can answer false because yeah, what I said earlier. False. I don't think it represents credibility. I can do it. Oh, oops. I'm gonna get you. Anyway, you can see that my credibility, whether I'm on low credibility, answer, but I'm still alive. Fortunately, but I want to replay. Yeah, that was okay. I'm gonna close this. Here we are. All right, so that was our game. We played through it twice, showing the different kinds of inconsistencies we can give that result in the characters calling us out for contradictions. We also showed how to win the game by going against your own moral intuitions and being wary of the the leading questions, how the questions can manipulate us. So I'm going to show you what the game is actually about. Okay, I'm going to show you what the game's about. I hope this is fine. Fine. Okay, 1 second. Hello, I'm back. Yeah, and so I'll be just walking you through the code, but first explain what the game's all about. As you could see just now, we were James Brunner. The player was James Brunner, and we were undertaking 4 entrance interviews for the American Civil Service, and we could see that in the first part of with the letter, right? And the interviews all had really strongly worded questions like, isn't it wrong to do that? Isn't it wrong to do X and Y? I can show you some of the. I'm just going to show you some of the questions that I wrote over here. Just going to custom array. Let you see all the questions, right? So should our system reward students who work hard to rise above their humble backgrounds? That's a very clearly leading question. And how that works is, and all of these are leading questions suggesting that legacy ambitions are bad, or saying that fairness and meritocracy is where it's at. We need meritocracy, and meritocracy is great. And so after answering all 5 questions, most of them being yes, we can't really say no to this question, even though it's really neutral. So there's a neutral question. Would you support the introduction of a nationwide streaming examination? And that's a hot take, but you can't really say no to it. When I said no to it, they call me out for contradicting myself, right? And I guess the objective of the game is to pass the interviews without giving answers that contradict previously expressed opinions, right? So And whenever we do contradict ourselves, our credibility score goes from low to like high to normal to low to disaster, right? And when it's disaster, we lose, and when it's not disaster, they congratulate us to pass. So unbeknownst to the player, these interview 1 and interview 3, interview 1 and 2 actually are on the same topic. So it's listed interview 1 and 2 here, but just now we did them in a different order. But yeah, these two interviews are actually on the same topic. It says, would you oppose the introduction of a nationwide streaming examination? And it lists a bunch of leading questions talking about why, talking about how actually nationwide streaming examinations are bad. They're not that good, or rather, not that they're bad, but they have many disadvantages too, right? For example, hiring of private tutors or forcing children to study incessantly and give up on extracurricular pursuits. And so this, at the end of the day, we stay true to everything, we follow our moral intuitions for everything. The leading questions actually trap us into saying true to both supporting and opposing the same policy. And then if we end up doing that 2 or more times, we lose the game. So at its core, this game is really about how leading questions can compel us to adopt specific views. Each leading question really appeals to our moral intuition. And even though we were never really coerced to hold any one view, they never really coerced us to say yes or no, to support or oppose a streaming examination, or what was the other question, like ethnic quotas, like this one. I'll show you that. They never, we even though we were never really coerced to agree or disagree with the final question, in fact, it's really neutral. We are persuaded to do so by the questions over the course of the interview. And after being forced into a bunch of contradictions, I guess playing this, we realized that honestly, we never really were truly free to hold an independent view. Even though I entered this perhaps with a sympathetic idea, like a sympathetic attitude towards college admission quotas. At the end of this interview with all the leading questions, I might find myself thinking, oh, actually, yeah, I think we should remove college admission quotas. And then that leads us to agree with the policy suggestion to remove it, right? So in other words, our opinions are affected. Our opinions aren't truly free. They're not truly independent. They're affected by the very wording of the questions. And I guess one of the cool things about this entire game is that whether players are free to have those independent opinions parallels the question of agency, really. Okay. And whether we could do what we want in this game at all, right? And that's a big question that I'll be discussing in my write-up about this game. What I wanted to talk about more was how the game works. So we might think that leading questions are a complicated thing, right? We might think that leading questions are like magical words that if you say them in a certain order, you coerce people to believe one thing or another. But that's not really true, and we can show exactly how this game forces players into contradictions. Okay, I'm gonna go through the logic of it. First, let's go through the logic of it. So we can see that, I've edited the code here. You can see it's very neat. This is the starting sequence: the letter, the invitation, the instructions. This is very seamless. It's built into the dialogue, so we can either confirm or deny whether this is our first interview and receive additional instructions, right? And the interview begins, and the scoreboard appears, and we have quizzes. Notice there are quizzes and transition quizzes. Let's see. Oh, I was gonna say as well that actually, if you contradict yourself many times at the start of the game, you physically cannot get like to the last interview, because once you get to the tiger, if your credibility is already disastrous, right, you die straight away, like the tiger eats you up straight away. So that's funny. It's only if you have remaining health left, right? If your credibility is still low, that you even get interview 4 at all. It's still low and not disastrous, then you get to interview 4 at all. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna show you a little bit about how the quizzes work. Right. Quiz. All right. It's loading. It's slowly. Okay. So this code, oops, let me start. Okay, this code plays 5 questions and update, and it updates something called balance. So if an index, 2 variables here, index and balance. Index helps us cycle through the questions, and balance actually records the player's alignment. So if you say yes to something, balance +1. If you say no to something, which means you go against the slant of the leading question, balance it goes -1, right? And at the end, when you do answer this question, when you do answer the final question, the first thing it does is that it records your answer to the final question. So for quiz 1, there's a variable that it stores. It's a Boolean variable, like true or false. It stores that answer that you gave for quiz 1. It stores it in this variable. For quiz 2, if you answer true to the final question, it stores it as well. But more importantly, it compares the answer you gave with balance. For example, if you answered true to the last question, which means you agreed, you're consistent, everything is consistent, it will check that balance is consistent with what your answer was and says, awesome, I'm impressed by your sincerity. And if not, let's say you had your balance is negative, which means that for most of the interview, you had been saying how bad it was. Like you had been talking about all the nasty, you had disagreed with all the advantages of streaming examinations. And then finally you come out and say, oh yeah, I actually like streaming examinations. Update health will happen. So they'll call you out for a contradiction and then dock your credibility score. Okay, so that's how balance works. That's pretty interesting. And I'm going to show you how quiz answer works. So quiz answer is a Boolean variable. Quiz 2 answer is a Boolean variable set to true. Right? This comes into play in the reverse quiz. I'm going to show you the reverse quiz. Right? It's the same. This part is exactly the same as the normal quiz. These reverse quizzes are those that we had at the 3rd and 4th sections of this game, where they asked about the same policy but with different leading questions. And what happens is, okay, balance happens, and this time there are 2 levels of checks, right? The first level of check is compare with initial. First, the game compares your answer for the final one with the answer, the final quiz, with the answer for the earlier quiz. For example, if I said I supported streaming earlier, and now I said true to opposing streaming, they'll call me out for it. They'll say you contradicted your answer from the earlier interview, moron, and they'll dock my score, right? And on the other hand, if I contradict balance, means I'm internally inconsistent, means that in the same way that quiz 1, like the first few quizzes, checked for my internal consistency, they also check that in a reverse quiz and they'll dock my health. And you can see that it gets harder and harder. Earlier in quiz 1, it was very easy to avoid getting your health docked, like credibility, like taking a hit to your credibility. It's like a 50-50 chance if you think about it well. But in later quizzes, because of how the leading questions are phrased, it actually gets harder. You can see this tree. If you see this tree possibilities, like they're nested if loops. They're actually out of 3. If I said true, for example, if I said true to the final question, 2 out of 3 times, right, I would get my credibility diminished. I would take a hit to it. Only if I planned ahead in advance and thought hard about what my question for this might be, or if I was careful and was alert to the leading question, would I be able to avoid getting my credibility docked and stay healthy. And the interviewer might say, impressed, you've got some heart, or I don't think you really understand, but they would keep my credibility normal because my view is consistent all the way. Okay, so we can see that between all these very strongly partisan interviewers and their very strongly partisan questions, we have to navigate it carefully because the game does remember everything we say and use it to judge our future answers. Okay, the next thing I wanted to show you was the credibility score. Credibility is the text model thing. Okay, credibility under text model. We have health level, which is a number, health points, which is the credibility score, normal, low, disaster, and abysmal, and color. So what we can see is under, oops, tick the wrong thing. Yeah, under update health, we can see that when the update health procedure is called, it actually the variable for health level increases, and the value it iterates through these arrays to set the health as desired. For example, credibility low would be health level of like 1, and then it would show low and purple, and disaster would show red. Okay, so that's something else I showed. Next thing I'd like to show, and before we wrap up, is transition and replay. Transition and replay. So first, prolonged speech. Prolonged speech is basically something I coded to show the dialog box and things like that. Not really, sorry, show the instruction bar, and then the instruction bar tells us what to do. Prolonged speech basically says, transition, what transition does is that it tells us our credibility and tells us to go to the next thing. So prolonged speech ends with us clicking the interviewer, right? You can see it instructs us to the message continue, which means it tells us to click the interviewer, and then it transports us to the next place. So this is an interesting affordance of the digital media. What I wanted to say was that because we have so much precise control over where what the user is seeing, we can control the user and say like, okay, 1 second I'm in first office, and the next second I'm in another office, right? And that's really cool. It allows us to have this like seamless transition where the user doesn't have to think much about traveling, like all the things that go in between, and think about the questions themselves. And therefore, we have this very strong flow, a stream of questions that the user is focusing on and thinking about, right? More importantly, I want to show you the replay. So you can see under this collision listeners, this resets the game. Essentially, what happens is when you go into the mouth of the tiger, it resets the tiger's mouth, and it resets everything to their original positions. As you saw, all the characters appeared in the last scene. They all go back, and you just start the game seamlessly, right? You go to my first method, and and the soundtrack plays again, and the game starts all over again. So that's cool. That's really cool because you don't have to come out of the game. You don't have to close the program to restart. You can just restart within the game itself, right? And this is something that the digital medium allows you to do, and you can put into the code. Okay. Oh, there's one more thing I'd like to show you, which is the keepTalking Boolean variable, which I have here, right? Essentially, at the start, you realize, and this I also use this in the prolonged speech procedure, but you realize that at the start we have a letter click to play. So at the start of the letter, how do I know whether the user has finished reading the letter? How do I know whether the user is ready to move on to the next interview? I do this with the variable keepTalking. So I set keepTalking to true, and I set a click listener. So the mouse click will set keepTalking to false. When keepTalking is set to false, it will move on from this loop. Otherwise, it will stay. So when I click keepTalking, it will move on to change the scene and all that. So that's interesting, and as I'll explain in my write-up, I use this to ensure that the game matches the pace of the user. The user has some control over the pace of the game. For example, if you're not ready to go on to the next interview, it won't just flood you through to the next interview and start asking you questions immediately. You have some control over when you want to click to progress, when you want to click to show that you've read the letter or you're ready for the next interview. Okay, so those are most of the procedures that we've covered that are inside this game. As you can see, it's actually not that difficult. And all of the game can be reduced into like lines of code. And I think that's something I really wanted to do with this project, was to unpack something like a game about leading questions that kind of pushes you to to answer different kinds of questions and tries to trap you in contradictions. It can really be reduced to lines of code. It really can be reduced into like a basic logic tree, like a branching logic tree. And all this plus my reflections on the digital medium as a whole will be talked about in my write-up. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for listening, and I will see you later.